Hello, 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 and welcome to the Pranary Fireside Chat. It's good to see so many people. My name is Sandras. I am the I'm the CEO and founder of Pranary, which is a practical business school for entrepreneurs. And Pranary exists to help entrepreneurs to grow their businesses as well as to help them get investor ready. So we make entrepreneurship education practical. You know how when you go to business school and thinking that you're going to learn to run your startup and you don't know what to do? We fix that at Pranary. So at Pranary, we make sure that it's practical. So we only have entrepreneurs who've done it before. They're the ones who are mentors, who are teachers. They're the ones who are guiding you. And then we have stories from other experienced entrepreneurs who guide you to give you a shortcut on what you need to do to grow big, scalable, successful businesses. And we emphasize entrepreneurship because we believe that entrepreneurship has got the power to change people's lives. And also it's big, scalable companies that actually create the biggest impact. Mike Quinn is a co-founder and CEO of Boost. Boost is on a mission to power growth for 100 million underserved entrepreneurs in Africa's informal economy who are creating sustainable jobs and income for the future. And prior to Boost, Mike was co-founder and CEO of Zona, one of Africa's earliest fintechs. During his 10-year tenure, Zona processed $2.5 billion of transactions, generated $26 million in income for 3,000 micro entrepreneurs across Zambia and Malawi, and raised $35 million in investment. In 2015, Zona was recognized by the Nike Foundation and Unreasonable Institute as part of the Girl Effect Accelerator for helping girls out of poverty. For his leadership, Mike was awarded the Axion 2017 Edward C. Clogas Award for Leadership and Innovation in Financial Inclusion, along with one of the Schwab Foundation's 2018 Social Entrepreneur of the Year. So Mike holds an MBA with distinction from Oxford University, where he was a scholar for social entrepreneurship, along with a Master's in Science in Management Development from the London School of Economics and a BSc in Mechanical Engineering from the University of British Columbia. He grew up in Calgary and has lived in Ghana, Zambia, South Africa, and the UK. And Mike has a beautiful wife and two beautiful, beautiful children. Great. Mike, it's good to have you here. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Sandras. It's a privilege to be here. So thanks for inviting me.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Let's start from the time that I think you were graduating and then you came to Africa for the first time, went to Ghana, and then you went back, then you came like on a mission to try to build to build companies in Africa. Tell us about that story, the earliest stages of that.
Yes, it takes me back down memory lane, but so I had no connection to Africa growing up. I was in okay, my video is working good. I was grew up in Calgary, which is like a snowy part of Canada. And when I finished engineering, I wanted to do something interesting with my career that could help people, but I really didn't know what. And then I discovered this organization called Engineers Without Borders, and it sent me on two volunteer placements. I was a volunteer in Ghana and then a volunteer in Zambia for about 2.5 years, working in rural agriculture projects. And I just fell in love with the continent and saw like so much opportunity, but also learned a lot about the problems and challenges, and decided to just dedicate my working career and really like my whole life to doing what I could to use like my privilege and the skills and experiences I was gaining to do things that could help other people in Africa. And I ended up doing 2 years of higher education in the UK and got a business degree, and then came back, as you mentioned, on a mission to connect investors that were sitting in the US, like in New York or Washington, or like in the UK or Europe, like in London, that had pools of money and wanted to invest in purpose-driven entrepreneurs building scalable enterprises in Africa. But they didn't know how to find those entrepreneurs. And I thought I could connect the dots from the investors to the entrepreneurs. And I managed to get a plane ticket from one of them. There was this US-based impact investing fund called the Grassroots Business Fund. And I said, I had a recent network in Zambia, knew people there, was keen to move back, and would help them find an investment, and then I would stick around and help build the company. So they bought me a plane ticket to Lusaka, and just a very lucky break. The very first people I met were these two brothers named Brad and Bart McGrath, who were building like what was one of the very first fintechs on the continent. And they previously had a business in the airtime space in Malawi, integrated to one of the telcos there, TNM, for anybody who's in Malawi right now, that would then calculate the commissions and pay commissions to the people on the street selling scratch cards. So they had the technology from that, and they were trying to apply it in the agriculture space in Zambia, working with a cotton company, paying farmers like for their cotton crop. So it was very like early days of digital payments and considering like mobile wallets and all these things that are now becoming commonplace. They had the vision like well ahead of their time. And when I joined, M-Pesa in Kenya was just starting to pick up and grow exponentially. So they were looking at this saying like, well, maybe we could bring the M-Pesa model to Zambia and create like a whole digital ecosystem and be first to market. And I ended up convincing the investment fund to do what probably was one of the very first seed investment rounds in the fintech space in Africa, definitely from like a global investor. So they invested $200,000 back in 2009. And I ended up working with these guys for the next 10 years to build Zona. So let me pause there.
Fantastic. You have people from Zambia who are excited to say, Mike speaks Lozi. I'm so excited. And nice. And what's your Ghanaian name, Mike?
My Ghanaian name, people would call me Yao. Yao Manu, because I'm Thursday born and I'm second in line.
Fantastic. It's really amazing, like the different cultures in different parts of Africa. So tell us now about the growth of Zona, like just the amounts of raises you made and how the journey was from starting with that idea between Brad and Brett saying, hey, brother, I think I've got an idea, to growing it to where you did.
Yeah, such a great question. So the book I ended up writing when I left Zona, it's called Failing to Win, and it's structured in 3 parts. And this first part is called Founding, which is, I think, the detailed answer to your question, but I'll give you kind of the summary. So the founding phase was exhilarating, but extremely hard because nobody had done what we were doing. There was no investment ecosystem. There was no startup ecosystem. So we were really like quite pioneers, even though at the time we didn't really think of it that way. And you have to kind of go back in time to a world where there's no smartphones. There's GPRS or edge internet, like data internet connection. I still, when I moved to Lusaka, we had like a dial-up modem in my house, and we were paying, I forget the kwacha equivalent because the exchange rate has changed so much, but it was like $400 a month, US equivalent for like home internet. And 90+% of the population didn't have bank accounts. So people were just like physically moving cash around, which is still largely the case in the informal economy across Africa. But at that point, there was no alternatives to send or receive money. But people were moving money every day, of course. They were just doing it through the parastatal post office network, where you would, if you were a salaried employee, you'd go to the main Lusaka post office on Cairo Road, pay up to 15%, and then the post office would take the money, and then pay it out to the receiver at one of their branches. But that sometimes could take like a couple of weeks for the money to get paid out. Or what the more common way of doing it was people would just like either physically carry cash themselves or go give it to a minibus or a taxi driver or a bus driver, right? And that would charge them another fee, which could be anywhere from 10 to 20%, just to carry the cash. And this came with a lot of risk and time delays. And we had this insight, like, people are getting phones. There's M-Pesa models moving in Kenya. Let's create this mobile money, this mobile money transfer system. But the part of the innovation that we borrowed from Kenya and applied in Zambia wasn't the mobile wallet. I think we were smart enough to really understand that Zambia wasn't ready for a mobile wallet. People weren't looking for this use case of storing mobile money and getting a full range of financial services. They just wanted to send and receive money, and they wanted that to be instant, as opposed to taking a long time and being very expensive. And so we borrowed the agent network innovation from Kenya, where M-Pesa was really the first company that figured out how to take a bank branch, like a physical bank branch, and put it as a person with a mobile phone. It could be a feature phone that would sit in their shop and could have a cash box in front of them, and then they could do cash in, cash out transactions to consumers and earn a commission on every transaction. And so the model we started with was help with people could walk up to one of our agents, and we'd just paint a sign that said "send money here" and have a signboard out front with the pricing to send money. And then the agent on the inside would have the phone. They would, the first time they would register the customer's details, so that the next time they came, the customer would just need to have their ID or their name or their phone number, and our system would automatically populate that to help speed up the transaction. But the customer would give cash to the agent, and then our system would send an SMS to the receiver, who would then go collect cash at another agent, and then the agents would earn a commission on each transaction. So the consumers wouldn't have a store of value or a mobile wallet, but our system would still collect the details. So we would know the data on who was moving money to and from, and what agents they were using. And the sender would pay a fee, and the receiver would withdraw for free. So that was the basis of the model. I'd love to say it took off, but it took really 3 to 4 years. And part of it was just figuring out how do we get the right agents in the right locations with the right behaviors, who would have float. And we ended up building a digital loan product so that our agents would always have liquidity, because we would actually be funding that, finding the people that we could trust, and the tools that we could onboard them with and train. We didn't do any consumer marketing. We just relied on word of mouth and people just referring to their friends. So there were lots of ups and downs, but the main thing that I think we got wrong a lot is we just didn't focus. So we almost viewed this money transfer product as something on the side while we went and we were still experimenting with farmer payments, and then we built a bulk payment product, and we were trying to do bank integrations, and we were just trying completely unfocused, trying to build this whole digital economy by ourselves from scratch. And it was really when a few years later, where the money transfer product was just growing on its own with very little effort, that we realized we need to double down on this thing, because it was the part of the business we were spending the least amount of time on that was growing the fastest and making us the most revenue. Whereas as a startup, we kind of kept chasing the new and shiny and just developing new things all the time. Lots of ups and downs, but if you read the details in the book around all the times we ran out of cash and challenges we had, you'll see some of the more detailed explanation of that period.
I see that, and you're right. And as startups, a lot of times we are focusing on what we think the customers would want, and also what we had envisioned initially to build, compared to what actually is taking off. And you realize that, oh, this is the piece that's taking off. We should focus on that. And you explain that in the book and the process in which you took to get to that point. And
I'm going to give you just an example, because I also see Sandra Jerry from Kitwe has joined. Hi, Sandra. I'm sure there'll be more Zona customers and agents here. But Sandra actually tell her story in the book. where when we set up Sandra as our agent in Kitwe, I drove up with another guy, Graham, and Teddy Sampa, and we needed an agent in Kitwe, which is the second biggest city in Zambia. Teddy knew Sandra, who was very, very young at the time and looking for an opportunity, but we didn't have any systems and processes. We literally gave Sandra, we told her, hey, do you want to be an agent for this brand new company? It wasn't even called Zona at the time, it was called Mobile Transactions. And we will give you some floats, but you have to find like a table and chairs and then make your own signboards, because we ran out of flyers. We literally left her with nothing. And it was a big leap of faith. It wasn't the right way of doing things. So I look back on time and like, geez, how did we get that so wrong? But Sandra, seized the opportunity and just started recruiting customers to her location. And then over the subsequent years, ended up building like this network of agents that she was running across Kitwe, and it became just like a powerhouse, like a network that was sending and receiving all the money transfers to and from Kitwe, and just really helped like the whole model get going. And we were able to tap into talent like Sandra across the country that built this network for Zona and created like a whole ecosystem for people to send and receive money that became like amazingly successful. So it was really on the back of entrepreneurs that made it work.
Fantastic. And yeah, we see a lot of Zona people have joined from Zambia, from Malawi. So cool. And yeah, a few from Mozambique as well. Great. And so could you, I know like the founding team, like you're very dedicated to Zona. You named your dog Zona. Super cool. Like there's no better dedication, right? Now, could you tell us about, before we get into some of the lessons that you highlight in the book, tell us about the highlights. Like what were the Zona highlights, like the great moments or the wins and all the things?
So there was a lot, but it was actually not the things that when I look back that you would expect them to be. Like every time we closed a big funding round, which is what gets on the LinkedIn announcements and what you kind of read about in the press and everybody thinks about when it comes to startups. Like those were the moments where I was like typically quite burnt out and exhausted, and they were almost like anticlimactic because the deals took so long to close and they were so tiring. And so by the time like the funding rounds closed, it was just like, oh, finally, right now we have some money and we can start doing some things. And often we were like, down to like the bare bones where we just had like no cash left in the bank and just like on running on fumes. The highlights for me really were the times I spent in the field. And I took a month back in, I think it was 2017, where I just spent a full month like working and visiting and working with our agents and like spending, nights, even having dinner with them and staying with them and meeting their families. And, seeing like visiting Sandra and staying in her house that she had just built with the profits she made from Zona, having dinner with Masozi and her family in Lusaka, and Paul from, Kitwe and hearing his wife talk about how hard he was working, and then meeting all the tellers that our agents were like employing and putting back through school, and who were all like wanting to become agents themselves or going on to like higher education. Those were the real highlights for me, because the one thing that I'm very proud of is just the impact we had at Zona. Whatever happened at the end or the successes and failures we had commercially as a business, I really believe that we mattered and just made a huge amount of difference to people in Zambia and to their family, and also to the broader startup ecosystem, because the people that worked at Zona are now doing amazing things, and like our investors went on to then raise like bigger funds to invest in new startups and new founders. So we were quite like pioneering, and the impact I think was very real that we achieved.
Could you tell us about some of the numbers you were doing? I know we talked about them in the introduction. The numbers in terms of transactions, what you're processing, and how much was finally raised, all of that.
Yeah, so I believe at our peak, we were processing about 80 million US dollars per month in transaction value. Like over the 10 years I was there, it was like over $2.5 billion cumulative. And these were like sending and receiving money transfers and all the other like, bill payments and bulk payments and subsidies from governments to farmers and NGOs in the form of like scratch cards and vouchers we were also redeeming. So we aggregated a tremendous amount of value. We had over 3,000 agents that were then employing like a lot of tellers. So we created like, we didn't count the exact number of jobs, but like it would have been in like the 5,000 plus jobs we created. Earned collectively about $26 million of income paid directly as commission to our agents and onto tellers. And at our peak, we had over a quarter of the adult population of Zambia as active users. So it was big. And in Malawi, I should mention, when we started in Malawi, we were doing a money transfer network just for people within Malawi. But then we did this partnership with Mukuru, which then ended up acquiring the Malawi business. And so it's a Mukuru network now. But Mukuru was just starting when they did the partnership with us. And that grew into $100 million US a year corridor of remittances paid from South Africa to Malawians that were cashed out at Zona agents. That was the fastest growing remittance corridor in Africa. And I believe it was about over 2% of like Malawi's GDP. I don't believe that would have been successful or had existed to the extent it is now, like without Zona figuring that out. Because it was really the strength of that agent network and the reliability of paying out those remittances that made the service work and people to trust it and repeat. So it was a very very instrumental agent network we had.
Tell us now about some of the lessons from the book, Failure to Win. So the book is really amazing. I encourage everybody to get the book on Amazon. Just get it on Amazon. I think, Mike, do you still have any free promo codes we can people?
Yeah. If anybody, I do. I have a few promo codes for audiobooks. If anybody wants to ping me on LinkedIn, the condition is you have to leave a review and on LinkedIn and Amazon afterwards, just to help spread the word. But I can get some free copies of audiobooks.
We can help you spread that. So we will share that. We could do that and send the message to everybody.
Yeah, and it's also like it's available ebook and audiobook on Amazon, but also in Zambia bookstores. And please, if you can't find it, like just ask the people, and if they've run out, tell me. So we can get them restocked. But there is a distributor in Zambia. So the middle part of the book is called Failing, and that's actually the biggest part of the book. And it's like the 8 biggest failures that I experienced and what I learned from them, and what I would have really done differently. And they're failures because what I've kind of figured out how to do as a superpower that I believe that all founders should like do is embrace failing, and embrace it as a key to like learning and progress. Because it took me a long time to I had to leave and then really look back and reflect on this, that everything we achieved was because we had failed and then had a breakthrough. So it wasn't like we had like this plan and we started and it all worked. It's like we were just failing the entire time. And then it was only like when you look back in hindsight when you're like, oh, like look how much progress we've made. So the end of the story is like we failed to win because ultimately we lost our market share and had a funding crisis from our investors that cut our Zona journey short and didn't allow us to achieve what we wanted to. But we were failing in order to win the entire time. And some of the hardest lessons like I learned were very much internal. That are the things that every startup and every founding team experiences, but often like don't talk about openly and don't share. So I wanted to be of service to other founders and leaders, to share my stories openly and vulnerably with the hopes of that they could incorporate some of these lessons and not repeat some of the mistakes. So it's not like a how-to guide that you like, I have a winning formula. I probably just have more of some stories that people will empathize with, and maybe some tips and insights to like avoid the worst parts of the failures that I certainly experienced. And so some of these are like, failing to become a team. And even though we were an awesome team, my co-founders and myself like fought all the time. We took years of our lives to figure out how to work with each other, how to figure out like to separate roles and responsibilities, failing to design culture, like all the mistakes we made, like hiring too far ahead of the curve, hiring too fast, growing our expense costs too much, not taking ownership of like designing our culture and our ways of working, failing to expand, like ultimately hiring like the wrong kind of executive leader and entering into a new market without understanding that market well enough, not having like the right investor that was incentivizing us the wrong way. So just some like very like real lessons, because when you're doing it for the first time, like we had too many firsts. Like I was a first-time CEO. We were first to market. We had investors that were first-time investors in Africa or in our ecosystem. So we were just all really learning on the fly. And it's like when you do this, you're like just failing constantly, and it can be also discouraging. But it's also part of the entrepreneurial journey of just persevering through that, and then trying to figure out how to get really good at recognizing or separating like we failed, that sucked, to like, oh, we failed, and getting really curious about like why that thing didn't work, and then what are like the insights you can draw from that and lessons that you can then design like a new experiment or pivot the business, or design like a new feature and then try again. And then just like getting better and better at like failing in order to win. And just like constantly being like curious as an entrepreneur, and like persevering are kind of some of the things I've drawn from those experiences.
I see. You're absolutely right in terms of the vulnerability and the honesty, all of that. When I read that book, and a lot of people read the book and like just tears, right? As well, this book, and especially this part or this part, but the different pieces of the book had lots of people saying, wow, that's really vulnerable and very honest, which is really, I commend you for that, because a lot of times it's like you could have written this book 10 years from now, and now they're a multi-billionaire, and Boost now is a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, hey, by the way, we failed, then just fail, persevere, get back on your feet, like, yeah. Fail fast, fail forward, failure is good. But you writing this now, it's a bit more raw, more honest, and it's more trustworthy, which I must say, well done on that. And I know that it was a hard book for you to write. You shared that as well. Like, it was a difficult book to write, and you had to rewrite it a few times.
Yeah. It took me several rewrites. The first version, I sent it to an editor I was working with, who said, geez, this is a letter to your therapist. This isn't a book. It's a 120,000 word letter to your therapist. Because that was very much just like the processing, the period of processing. And then I had to rewrite it. And I also had to like live a little bit to give it not necessarily a happy ending, but this is like the third and last section of the book is called Winning, which was really when I started writing it, I was like, we failed to win. That was where the title came from. And then I realized through the process of writing, we were actually winning the entire time. But then the last chapter was how I embraced and learned from failure to then set up a new business, and to take all of those lessons to then start my new company, Boost. And just like how this is like a very natural process of being an entrepreneur. It's like getting back on your feet. And going back to the beginning where, I didn't get an exit. So like financially, I was completely unstable. I was older. I had children that I like needed to take care of. And I just didn't have like that flexibility and freedom that I did at the beginning of Zona, where I'm like, I could do anything. I could go anywhere. Right now I had bills to pay and kids to look after, and like an amazingly supportive wife by my side. But who had gone through the emotional turmoil at the end of Zona. And like, that's the other thing as an entrepreneur, is like, I know you will know this, Sandras, and And with your amazing wife, Lalemba, it's like you kind of live these journeys together. It's like you don't do it alone. And you know, the wins and the highs and lows, like your whole community and family like feel that with you. So I had quite a lot of almost like when I was starting my new company, my dad was like, you know, he read the early version of my book and he's like, why on earth would you ever want to do that again? He's just like, you know, he just couldn't understand it at all. But he was almost expressing it like out of like love for me, because he was like, as his son, he's like, I don't want you to go through that experience again, right? And it was almost like too painful for him to think that I would actually get up back and do it. But for me, I was like, oh no, this is my calling as an entrepreneur. I can't think of anything else I'd rather do. Like I almost have to do it again, because now I've learned all this stuff. Like it would be just such a shame not to apply it and build a new company and hope to achieve something that has even more impact.
Yeah, that's profound, because we all go through that as entrepreneurs, and still get to a point where you're saying, should I stop doing this? And actually we'll be more miserable if we stopped than if we did it again and tried to work it out. Now, could you tell us about specifically some of the lessons maybe around execution, around moving fast, and when you're seeing competition, that what would be some of the lessons for some of the entrepreneurs here who are at like the growth stage, and maybe they've raised money, but maybe they're not spending it on the right things, or they're not spending it at all, or something is just not happening? What would you say?
So I will give you 3 tangible takeaways, and the end of the book finishes with actually a list of 5 virtues and 20 principles that are kind of like my constitution for my new company, that are really the summary of learnings. But three tangible takeaways to answer your question, I would say, one is, which is a core principle of build your team with like the fewest right people. And this is especially if you have money, because when you don't have money, you by nature or by default, you're forced to be resource constrained. As soon as you get money, you're like, oh, I can hire people finally, which you need to hire people, but you tend to like overcompensate and overhire people, and then you hire people, then hire other people, and then hire other people. And the bigger your team gets, the more challenges you have staying aligned, the more time you spend on like hiring, on culture building. You make tons of mistakes over and over. Then you often find you've hired the wrong people. Then you've got to fire them. You make those decisions 6 months too late. It has all these knock-on effects. So like the fewer people you have on your team, the faster you can move, the easier it is to stay aligned, the more agile you can be. So it's all about having like few people, and the lower your costs are as well. But then staying like getting the right people. Like that's the trick, right? So it's not like having a team of like B players, like that's like the smallest team possible. It's like having the people that fit your values and your culture, are aligned with you, fit the role, and have the right like skills and experiences and abilities to get the job done, right? I think that's like it's hard to find, so you got to be very purposeful about it. But I would just say that lesson number 1 is like build with the fewest right people, especially when you have money. Be extra deliberate about that. Number 2 is put your customer first and really focus on customer experience. Because owning the customer experience can actually win in the market. People like by default almost have this lazy explanation where they look at Zona and say like, oh, of course, like the telcos just ended up beating you at the end, right? MTN and Airtel, but that's actually not true. And we were winning, and we built up over years. We were competing against the 2 biggest telcos on the continent that were pouring millions of dollars into mobile money and branding and marketing, had way more assets than we did. And we ended up having like a 70 to 80% market share competing against them for years, because our customer experience was better. We had better agents. We understood them better. We were providing a better consistent service to consumers in the market. And it was only that when we needed to evolve and we needed more money to evolve and the funding didn't come through, that like they then were attacking us aggressively, and we couldn't maintain that competitive advantage. But just when you have money or when you don't have money, it's like just cut the internal stuff and just really focus on your customers. Who are your core customers? what are their aspirations, what are their pain points, how do you like work hard to solve them like every single day. You have to, you know, and then it goes to like lesson number 3 is don't underestimate your competitors. So you as soon as you become comfortable and you're winning, and that's when you need to be like the most nervous, right? So what often happens is like when you're not winning, you're like nervous about competition when you should be focused on your customers and not worried about competition. And then once you start winning, right, because your customer experience is working, that's when you should be worried about competition, right? And you need to be figuring out like what is the next thing, because once you have a competitive advantage, that's when everybody else is studying what it is that you've got that's like your secret sauce. So you need to be at that point like, okay, back to the drawing board, like what is the next thing that we're going to evolve to really like lead the market and like lead your customers, so that your competitors are always copying you. And you know, you're always one step ahead.
Fantastic. Yeah, I remember those days very well, like where the competitors would try different things, including trying to hire, like to poach some of your best people who are building right next to you, or like all the different things, right? Now, could you tell us about Zona now? I think it's now, I mean, tell us now where it's at, Tilt, and then you tell us about Boost, and then to everybody else, you can start typing your questions in the chat box. I'll get Mike to answer them. So type your questions, any questions that you've got for Mike. So tell us about Tilt.
Yeah, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask on that, because but I'll tell you kind of what happened. So yeah, so after I left, the company was under severe financial duress, and so we had to do really 3 things. We had to scale back our headcount aggressively, because we at our peak had like 250 staff, and the company just couldn't afford that anymore, having lost like most of our revenue and having our funding run rate cut short. We sold the Malawi subsidiary to our partner Makuru to really bring in cash. So it wasn't something we were hoping to do. We were wanting to like invest and expand in Malawi, but we were in a position where we didn't really have much of a choice. And then we, you know, as part of, I exited, and then we restructured the business so that even though it was in the same kind of superstructure legal entity, it was Zona Zambia, which then pivoted to an interoperable agent network doing cash in, cash out for the broader market, as opposed to just like owning the consumer at the end of the day, which was how we built the business. And then launching Tilt as a brand new startup to do B2B fintech. And my co-founder, Brett, took the reins and he ran with that. Initially, Brad, his brother, took over for a year and kind of completed the restructuring, and then gave Brett the bandwidth to think about Tilt. And so Tilt is now in the market, you know, doing B2B payments. I'm still connected with him, catch up every time, you know, time again, but I'm not fully up to speed on like the latest developments on Tilt. I went and then, you know, wrote the book and then started my new company Boost. Yeah, so maybe I'll end there. That's probably the kind of where they are. But, you know, in a way that Zona is another example of failing to win, right? Is that the failure of Zona has created, you know, wins for Makuru and Malawi, wins for the Zambia ecosystem, because the Zambia ecosystem is one of the healthiest like mobile money ecosystems and most competitive on the continent. 6.5 million active mobile wallets now, and then 2 new startups emerged out of that, right? Tilt that Brett's running, and Boost that I'm running.
I see. Tell us about Boost.
Yeah, so Boost is a B2B startup, really capitalizing, I think, on the lessons I learned from building an agent network, helping entrepreneurs like Sandra and others, so like that same target market, that are running retail shops, because retail entrepreneurs in Africa in the informal economy are creators of about 76% of jobs across the continent. And I think we all know Africa is a young population and growing quickly. And what is a common experience with every small retail entrepreneur on the continent is just like sourcing stock and inventory for their store at good prices with consistent quality that they can sell at a good margin to make money to their customers. And often, whether it's like provisions, drinks, meats like chicken or beef, pharmaceuticals, whatever the segment is, like this process of sourcing stock is a huge pain. And these businesses are also most often short on working capital. So they can't get access to affordable finance, or they just don't have enough working capital to grow and expand. So Boost is a B2B fintech platform to enable these small businesses through stock ordering, where they can see a catalog of products for their stores at good prices. Then they can access working capital through like buy now, pay later, or stock advances that we provide. And then on the back end, we have an enabling platform for third-party distributors and suppliers to load catalogs and to do like the last mile fulfillment. It's still early days. We purposely built this as a platform business. So we're currently operational in Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, and just starting in Egypt. And very much hope to be back in Zambia and Malawi after that. So and Mozambique too. So this should be a business that I designed it to scale, which was the biggest thing we couldn't figure out Zona. We figured out Zambia and Malawi, but we couldn't really figure out the multi-country scale. So that's like the big picture problem I wanted to tackle this time, is build a business that could in theory like expand everywhere by design if we can get the execution right.
Fantastic. Great. We're gonna get questions from the audience. Kapesa, hey Kapesa. Kapesa is asking, hi Mike, are you building or would you build another company in the same space like Zona? Having learned all the lessons, have you seen other opportunities or gaps? So I think you touched on it a little bit with Bruce, but
yeah,
what are the gaps in the same space like Zona?
Yeah, so just to mention, like I wouldn't build a company to compete with telcos again. So like the MTNs of the world. Like when we started Zona, we didn't want to. We foresaw that the industry would eventually become like a mobile operator-led mobile money ecosystem, because that was what was happening in Kenya, and we knew the strength of the companies like MTN and Airtel and the deep pockets they had. But we were first to market, and our agent network was so strong that we almost by default acquired like a consumer base in this big brand, and we had to defend it, right? So now I would not build a business to go and compete with the mobile operators. I would instead figure out what are the things you can build on top of them or with them as an enabler, and find like those gaps. So like the business I talked about with Boost is really around like ordering and fulfillment of like product catalogs and enabling distributors. B2B is much more defensible and is enabling to mobile money, and even what Tilt is doing is more B2B. It's easier to raise funding as well, because then you don't need as much money as you do in the B2C space. So, but there's so many opportunities. Like the advantage of where we are now is there's an ecosystem that is starting to thrive. So you can find lots of niches to start businesses.
There's a question from Muyaka. Hey Muyaka. It says, Mike, from your experience failing to win in the end, could you please share what the red flags one can look out for that indicate that one must stop? Like there is actually no winning.
Yeah. So the hard part of like being an entrepreneur is you never want to believe that there's no winning. And I still don't believe there's always the path, right? My kids, we used to watch like Finding Dory as an example. If anybody's seen that movie and has children, where Hank the octopus is like saying there's no way, and Dory's saying there's always another way, and he escapes from that. So I believe that like there's always the move you can make, or always another way to get out of the situation you're in. But I think what I now balance that with is a very healthy dose of pragmatism. And I need a co-founder, like I've learned about myself, where I need a co-founder who has like a more critical, like not cynical or pessimistic view of the world, but more critical, that can just like be more fact-based of like, here are the options, because like, just building a strategy on hope or optimism is not healthy, but as a founder, like you have to have that, because it drives you forward. So I think having that counterbalance. But just like being very realistic around like, you know, what are your growth prospects? How much money is it going to take? Who your competitors are? How you're going to differentiate? What are the things you're going to win at, and what are the things you're not going to win at? Right. So you might not know the answer to how to win, but you could probably have the answer of how you're not going to win, or how the things you're doing no longer are relevant. And that comes from just listening to your customers and looking at the data. Right. So when your customers, you know, your retention starts dropping, your competitors are picking up market share, then you need to move or you're going to die. And if you get to the point where you've lost enough market share where you know there's no options left, then that's like when it's maybe time to pull the plug. And ultimately, you want to know that 6 to 12 months before you get there, so you can either exit or partner or do something different. Like that's one lesson I had at Zona. Like looking back, you know, this happened at the end, happened to us so quickly. We were expecting to get a big funding round that didn't materialize. So there was all these situations that didn't allow us really to move fast enough. But certainly, you know, we could have done some big moves, probably six to 12 months. Or in the end of my book, I talk about our Series C collapsing. Like that was probably the moment where I didn't want to admit to myself, because of course I'm like, we need to keep going. But that was the moment where I think of being more pragmatic. It would have been so hard to do, but in hindsight, it would have been like, yeah, that would have been the time where we could have probably done something differently.
Great. There's a question from somebody whose name I can't read. One of these new made-up names. Says, Mike, tell us how the mobile money operators contributed to the downfall of Zona, or was it the regulation challenges from Bank of Zambia?
Yeah, so it was really neither in isolation. I'm gonna push this question back to say, like, read the book and you'll kind of see the complexity. And because it's so easy to think that there's one issue, but it was really like a whole web of issues and decisions that we made and didn't make, and the positions we were in, our funding, and the changes of regulation, and competitors picking up and carpet bombing us with kiosks. And I believe that there's no one thing that kind of happened or didn't happen. It was like the market shifted. And there are things that we could have done differently to move faster or to put ourselves in a position to still continue winning that we didn't do.
Peter Chunga is asking, hi Mike, Zona being the pioneer of money transfer in Zambia, you mentioned that Zambia was not ready for a wallet like the likes of M-Pesa. Don't you think this is where you missed it, especially that Airtel and MTN took advantage of that, and it's now the wallets that are growing fintech in Zambia?
Yeah, but you have to go back in time and realize Airtel and MTN launched their wallets in first before Airtel there was Zain, so I believe it was like 2011 that they both started rolling out, right? So it took a long time for the market to move towards wallets. There was also a regulation change in either 2017 or 2018 that allowed mobile money registration on the back of SIM card registration. And then it took building up an agent network, and it also took Zona creating the whole market. So if Zona didn't create the market with this amazing agent network and money transfer model, that also might not have worked as well. And we couldn't launch our own wallet because we didn't have a SIM card, which would have put us into a whole level of regulation and cost a lot of money that we didn't. So they had that advantage. And we couldn't get a USSD integration with MTN because they blocked us from doing it. So again, it's a very complex situation where the wallet is what people know now. But even within a wallet, the dominant use cases are still like P2P money transfers, cash in, cash out, right? So they're like, that is still like the dominant use case like around the world, not even just in Zambia. And if we had launched our Zona Plus offering with our wallet like 12 months earlier, that would have been the time. So we were right to not launch it when we did. We were wrong to then shift too slowly once we actually made the decision.
I worked for Cellpay. My first formal job was Cellpay, which was
the pioneer, like even before Zona Pioneer. I think they were the first one, right?
That's right. Christian Mulumba was supposed to meet with Christian. Yeah, cool. He also was with Zona.
Hey, Christian.
Says, hi, Mike. From our past experience, we failed to enter the DRC for so many reasons. Could you give us some insights on that? Why is the startup ecosystem in Africa more difficult for French countries? And what should French entrepreneurs do to bridge the gap?
Yeah, Christian, we need to talk. Okay, so maybe with the next iteration I'll get this right. But so we failed DRC and Mozambique. They were very, very different countries. Not only the language barrier, the regulation, the institutions, and we didn't have the right design or structure at Zona to move. And like in DRC, we needed a license and we had the wrong partner. And ultimately we couldn't even get our license to start. And then we made some mistakes where we hired like up a team before we could even have the ability to do a pilot. So we had like this cost base, spending quite a bit of money like on a team of people that we couldn't do anything because we weren't licensed to start. So like, just like as an entry strategy of thinking around like piloting and not spending money, and making sure that you kind of get something working and then you get the license and then you invest, as opposed to the mistake we made, which was the same mistake in Mozambique, of building up like a really big team, spending a lot of money without understanding the market, without understanding the use case, with having the wrong partner that gave us the license in Mozambique because we couldn't get our own, and then ultimately like failing to get any traction and just spending a huge amount of money when we could have still failed, but we would have spent less money, and then we might have been able to find something that was working. So yeah, I'll end with that. Now, maybe just on the question on French speaking and like also Portuguese countries. So it's hard, hey? Like investors right now, like investors are lemmings. They will follow the big markets, and right now like Nigeria is hot, so there's like hot markets and cold markets, and it will fluctuate. There will be cycles. There's not really much you can do about it, but I think finding alternative sources of like partnerships, like you can build a huge business in DRC. There's policy level and institutional level changes that need to happen for investment to flow in, but I think that's just something that we all need to work on. It's just there's not enough money in Africa. There needs to be more.
Fantastic. I think that's what we're dealing with Pranary, like trying to get into Francophone Africa and Lusophone Africa. So like looking at Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and DRC, for instance, that's a challenge, right? We'll do that with AWS next year. And yeah. Mike, there's a question from Muchu. Muchu is the co-founder of Lupia. It says, do you believe one of Zona's problems was trying to do too much? If there was one product offering you could focus on to ensure Zona's success, what would it have been?
Yeah, it was hard to, it's hard to put down on one thing or I believe that we could have got to the same point, hiring half as many people, and had a lot more money in the bank and been a lot more flexible and agile. So that's definitely one. So just like internally being a lot more focused, and then externally, or what probably is a strategy wise as well too. The one thing we could have done is we could have doubled down on Zambia and Malawi and not tried to expand into Mozambique and DRC. That would have been a very bold strategy at the time because the currency had just imploded. So we were under a huge amount of pressure to expand. But like looking back, it's like if we had hired fewer people to stay leaner, preserved more cash, and then like use that cash to double down on our two core markets, Zambia and Malawi, we could have had a different outcome. And I see there's a question from our old friend Wane, from my old competitor, who says, like, having been your competitor, do you see any learnings from MTN's acquisition request? So that request never got to me, Wane. I'm very curious of who it went to and how it kind of moved. Like it's a common thing where people are like, oh, why didn't you just sell to MTN or Airtel? Like if there was a conversation that was had, there was like rumors of things that were happening, but like nothing ever concrete got proposed to me or put in writing, or like I never had actually a meeting about it. So I think there was maybe like some like siloed communication as one, but interestingly, like if you kind of put yourself back in that time, at a period where Zona was clearly winning the market, and we were like miles out in front, and we had this like the best agent network and a great growing brand, and we were clearly like attracting a lot of investment. Like we weren't in a sell mindset. We were in an expand and a growth mindset, right? So it would have been very hard, even if we had gone to our board and said like, you know what, hey, we're growing like crazy and we've just raised all this money, but I think, you know, we've just convinced all these investors that we can beat the telcos because we're already winning. Let's now sell to them. Like that conversation internally, even if now we look back in hindsight and say that's what we should have done, right? That would have been, of course, that would have been a better outcome. But to have that conversation internally would have been different. And you know, I'm curious to kind of get Juane's perspective from the MTN side, because that conversation might have been had at a Zambia level, but without really an appreciation or understanding of our shareholding and our structure as a group, and you know, and whether, you know, maybe the deal that should have been done at the time that could have been a very different outcome is like, you know, if we could have done like a strategic partnership together. And one thing I write in my book is like, as kind of a flip side to the question is, back in like 2013, MTN, we were starting to think about, well, how do we build an agent network to enable the telcos? And then MTN launched agents right next to every one of ours overnight, to the point where some of our agents couldn't even open the door in their kiosks. They had to climb through the windows to get in, right? And then we did a partnership with Airtel, where Airtel, we integrated with them. We were trying to team up with Airtel, so we didn't have to compete with both telcos. And then Airtel ended up like kind of screwing us, because as soon as we signed an MOU and integrated, they still rolled out their own kiosks next door to ours anyway, and tore up the agreement with us. So the trust level between Zona and the mobile operators was very low. And it was like partnerships that could have been had that never were, that forced us into competition. And I will still say, like, to this day, like if we had closed our $40 million Series seed round and launched Zona Plus, which was by far the best product in the market, we acquired 50,000 customers in 3 months with it. We would have still, I think, gone on and built like a massive business on the back of that, and still had the telcos playing catch up. But all these factors came together that, you know, we lost the funding, the telcos were attacking us. MTN or Zambia and Malawi were like smallish markets, so we just couldn't get the funding from alternative sources. Like the timing was wrong, and all these factors resulted in like this failing to win, like as a, you know, in the point where Zona would still be the market leader today.
Fantastic. We'll take the last question from Lafonte. Hey, Lafonte. Says, do you think an opportunity still exists for a niche in between the telcos?
Yeah, so two things I would say. So one is, if you're going to take telcos head on, you need to have access to a huge amount of money. And there's a company called Wave, which is, you know, they're Y Combinator backed. They were incubating their business in Senegal. They copied the Zona model. They studied us. They rolled out the playbook in Senegal, and then they also had a remittance corridor from the US to West Africa. They sold for $500 million windfall, and then they just raised like a $200 million round led by Stripe. And now MTN is they're taking MTN on head to head and Orange Money in the French countries, and so they're trying to do that. And I know they're causing MTN tons of headaches as well. So we'll see if history repeats itself. Or if they actually do what we couldn't and end up winning in the end. But the only way that works is to have that deep pockets. The other way is to be an enabler and to really partner. And this is where you get into like more of a B2B space, which is what I would recommend 99 out of 100 founders and startups do. So like, unless you're in a market where like the telcos are so lazy and so bad and they're just like losing completely. And then even then you need to be wary that once you get traction, they're going to come after you very hard. So I would say like find the niches that the telcos are not going to be good at. And in that B2B space, there's like tons of them. Like they're not going to win the entire market. Nobody can. So there's a lot of opportunities to like enable and build on top of them.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike, for sharing the Zona story and your story and Boost and Tilt and the lessons. Now, the last question for me is the new funding sources. Like we all just think of a few investors, but you've raised money from different types of investors, including from syndicates and different types. Could you tell us a little bit about just that, like all the possible ways now that startup founders can raise money?
Yeah. Starting is a lot easier than it used to be. You don't have to go to institutional investors. You don't even have to fly anywhere now. Like COVID's changed that landscape. So the big one that's happening in Africa is Y Combinator. That's been a big disruption. If you're lucky enough to get into Y Combinator, they take 7% equity in your company, but they give you access to this network of Silicon Valley investors and help you get funded. So that's like a lot of startups are going through that and getting well positioned for fundraising. But if you're not lucky enough to get through that, and like I wasn't the second time around either, finding like angel investors, syndicates, and sometimes it's like you just tapping into somebody that, like, my best investor gave me $2,000, and then they introduced me to somebody that gave me 50, who introduced me to somebody who gave me 350 at my new startup. So getting small checks, using safe agreements, that's a huge innovation, because with the safe agreement, you can download it on the Y Combinator website, you can send it to an investor, you can create a company in the UK or in the US, like on the internet, pretty much instantly. And you can send people agreements, and then they wire you money. Like you still need the right proposition and the right vision and the deck and like all the things that are super important. But you don't need to worry or spend time talking to institutional investors that are like 2 steps ahead of you. Instead, just like find individuals and helpful investors. And I think there's more African investors that are also coming to the table. And like this is what we need to encourage more people like in Zambia and Malawi and South Africa and all these countries to there's lots of capital in Africa, like invest in founders and startups, right? Don't just build it, like put it in assets or houses, like help build the ecosystem, because those are the investors also that will help you the most, because they're going to open doors and provide the partnerships and the cover you need to get traction. Then once you get traction, you can then go to the other investors that can help you scale that up. And if you don't go to them too early, because they'll just say no.
Fantastic. Type 1 in the chat box to say thank you very much to Mike, Quinn, for sharing all this wisdom, all this insights, all this experience. Type 1 in the chat box. Thanks, Mike. Really, really great session. Like one of the best so far. Like really, really.
Thank you. Please, Sandras, you can help. I've got some free audiobooks. You can you can correlate or corral some people, and I can get you some promo codes. But everybody who gets one needs to spread the word and help others go buy it. This is just self-publishing a book. It's like a startup. It's like takes a long time to get to cash flow positive. Let me tell you that. So you don't do it to make money. So I appreciate everybody that's kind of supported it through buying it or telling your friends. It makes a huge difference. And for me, it's just like spreading the word. I wanted to get out there to help other founders. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mike. Cheers. Thank